They knew the crash was coming and said nothing. Somewhere in a closed room, a man stared at a screen. The numbers were collapsing. He had seen this before. He had the report. He had the proof. And yet, he closed the folder, straightened his tie, and walked into the press conference, and smiled. Millions of ordinary people were about to lose everything, their savings, their homes, their futures, and the people who could have stopped it chose not to. But why? Who were these men? What did they know? And most importantly, what are they hiding right now? Welcome to Dominance Aura, the channel where the powerful cannot hide. Now, before we go any further, if you are new here, think of this channel like a wise old friend, the kind who always tells you the truth, even when the truth is uncomfortable. So do us a small favor. You know how your grandfather always said, "Son, never miss something important twice." Hit that subscribe button right now, because missing this channel would be exactly that kind of mistake. And one more thing, drop a comment below and tell us, where in the world are you watching this from today? The community here stretches across continents, and every single location surprises us. Long before the world felt the earthquake, the ground was already shaking. It was the mid-2000s. America was celebrating. Housing prices were climbing every single month. Banks were smiling. Investors were confident. And ordinary families, teachers, drivers, nurses, were buying homes they had dreamed of their entire lives. Everything looked perfect. But deep inside certain offices, behind certain closed doors, a very different story was being told. Analysts at major financial institutions were running the numbers. And the numbers were terrifying. They had discovered something dangerous hiding inside the American housing market. Banks were giving home loans to people who simply could not afford them. These loans were then being packaged together, wrapped in complicated financial language, and sold to investors around the world as safe products. They were not safe. They were time bombs. One analyst at a mid-sized investment firm reportedly sat at his desk in 2005, staring at a spreadsheet that showed default rates beginning to climb. He ran the model again and again. The results did not change. He wrote a detailed internal memo. He described exactly what was coming. He used clear, direct language. No complicated terms, no hidden meanings. He sent it up the chain. The memo was received. It was read. And then it disappeared. No meeting was called. No alarm was raised. No warning reached the public. Because the institution was making too much money to stop. This was not one isolated case. Across Wall Street, across regulatory bodies, across government advisory rooms, similar signals were appearing. Similar memos were being written. Similar warnings were being quietly buried. The Federal Reserve had access to data showing household debt reaching historic levels. The SEC had reports flagging unusual risk concentrations inside major banks. Even certain members of Congress had been briefed on the fragility building inside the system. They all received the signal. And the system collectively chose to look away because the mechanism was not ignorance. The mechanism was something far more calculated. And that is exactly where this story gets dangerous. There is a question that haunts every major financial collapse in modern history. How do so many intelligent people say nothing? The answer is not simple, and it is not comfortable, because the silence that preceded the 2008 crash was not the silence of ignorance. It was not a mistake. It was not an accident. It was engineered. Imagine a machine, not made of metal or wires, but made of incentives, made of bonuses, made of promotions, made of fear. This machine had one function: to keep everyone inside it, quietly moving forward, without asking dangerous questions. And it worked perfectly. Inside the major banks of Wall Street, a culture had developed over decades, a silent, unspoken rule that every employee understood without being told. You do not question the system that is paying you. Junior analysts who raised concerns were reassigned. Mid-level managers who pushed back were quietly sidelined. Senior executives who expressed doubt were reminded of their stock options, of their year-end bonuses, of exactly how much they had to lose. The machine did not need to threaten anyone loudly. It simply made silence extremely profitable. But the architecture of this silence went far beyond the banks themselves. The ratings agencies, the companies whose entire job was to honestly evaluate financial products, were being paid by the very banks whose products they were rating. Think about that structure carefully. A bank creates a dangerous financial product, then pays a ratings agency to evaluate it. The ratings agency gives it a top-grade safe rating. The bank sells it to the world. Everyone in that chain was financially rewarded for saying nothing was wrong. This was not a conspiracy hatched in a dark room. This was a system that had quietly evolved to reward silence and punish honesty. The regulators were no different. The revolving door between Wall Street and Washington had been spinning for years. Senior regulators knew that after government service, a comfortable position at a major bank was waiting. That knowledge changes a man. It changes what questions he asks. It changes which reports he prioritizes. It changes how loud his alarm bell rings when the data tells him something is very wrong. Studies conducted after the collapse confirmed what many had suspected. The SEC had received multiple internal flagged reports between 2004 and 2007, identifying unusual and dangerous risk patterns inside major institutions. Those reports moved through the system. They were logged, they were filed, and they reached dead ends. There was one moment that captured everything. In 2006, a small group of economists presented findings to a gathering of the world's most powerful central bankers. Their research showed clearly the financial system was accumulating catastrophic hidden risk. The room did not applaud their courage. Instead, they were politely dismissed. Their methodology was questioned. Their conclusions were described as overly pessimistic. The most powerful financial minds on earth sat in that room, heard the warning delivered directly to their faces, and chose the comfort of silence over the courage of action. Because silence, by that point, was no longer just a habit. It had become a policy, and policies have consequences. Consequences that are never paid by the people who make them. So who exactly paid the price? There's a number that economists use, 11 trillion. That is the estimated amount of household wealth that vanished in America alone between 2008 and 2009, $11 trillion. But here's what that number does not tell you. It does not tell you about the woman in Ohio who worked 31 years as a school librarian, saved carefully, invested responsibly, and watched her entire retirement disappear in 11 days. Numbers do not bleed. People do. To truly understand the cost of this silence, one must stop looking at spreadsheets and start looking at faces. Because the crash of 2008 did not land equally. It never does. The men who engineered the silence, the executives who buried the memos, the regulators who looked away, most of them kept their homes. Most of them kept their savings. Some of them received bonuses, even as their institutions were being rescued by taxpayer money. Meanwhile, 8 million Americans lost their jobs. 6 million families lost their homes. Entire neighborhoods in Detroit, Cleveland, and Atlanta were hollowed out almost overnight. Streets that once had children playing became rows of empty houses with broken windows and foreclosure signs rusting in the front yards. But the destruction did not stop at the American border. The dangerous financial products that Wall Street had packaged and sold had been purchased by pension funds in Norway, by savings institutions in Germany, by investment funds in Japan and Australia. Ordinary working people in countries that had nothing to do with the decisions made in those closed rooms suddenly found their retirement funds compromised. Teachers in the Netherlands, factory workers in Ireland, government employees in Iceland. Iceland's entire banking system collapsed. A nation of 300,000 people was pulled underwater by the silence of men sitting thousands of miles away. There is a psychological term for what happened to the survivors of this collapse. Financial trauma. It sounds clinical. It sounds distant. But researchers who studied affected communities found patterns that looked less like economic statistics and more like the aftermath of a natural disaster. Increased rates of depression, collapsed marriages, rising suicide rates among middle-aged men who had lost businesses. They had spent decades building. One study conducted by the American Journal of Public Health estimated that the financial crisis contributed to nearly 5,000 additional suicides across North America and Europe. Between 2008 and 2010, 5,000 people who never appeared in any financial report, who were never discussed in any congressional hearing, who never received any bailout. And yet, while ordinary families were losing everything, the institutions responsible were being saved. In September 2008, the United States government approved a bailout package of $700 billion. $700 billion to rescue the very system that had knowingly walked the world off a cliff. The message that's sent was heard loudly by every person standing in an unemployment line, every family loading their belongings into a moving truck, every retiree staring at a pension statement that no longer made sense. The message was simple and brutal. The system protects itself. It always has. It always will. But perhaps the most dangerous cost was not financial at all. It was trust. Trust in institutions. Trust in governments. Trust in the idea that the systems built to protect ordinary people actually would. That trust, once broken at that scale, does not fully return. And a society that no longer trusts its institutions becomes something fragile, something angry, something dangerously easy to manipulate, which raises the most uncomfortable question of all. If the silence of 2008 produced this much damage, and the people responsible faced almost no real consequences, what is stopping the exact same silence from existing right now? Most people believe 2008 was a lesson, a painful, expensive, unforgettable lesson. They believe that after such devastation, after such public humiliation of the financial system, the world looked carefully at what went wrong, fixed the broken parts, and made sure it could never happen again. That belief is perhaps the most dangerous illusion of our time, because history does not repeat itself by accident. It repeats itself because the same structures remain, the same incentives remain, the same culture of profitable silence remains. And the evidence is not hidden, it is hiding in plain sight, exactly as it was before. Go back further than 2008. Go back to 1929. Before the Great Depression swallowed the world, internal reports within major American banks showed dangerous speculation building inside the stock market. Warnings were written, concerns were raised, and then buried. Go forward to 2001, the dot-com collapse. Analysts at major investment banks were privately describing internet company valuations as completely disconnected from reality. Some wrote it down. Some said it quietly in closed meetings, publicly. They told investors to keep buying. Then came 2008. Then came the sovereign debt crisis in Europe in 2010, where governments were quietly told their financial situations were far worse than public figures suggested. The public found out only after the damage was already done. Each of these events, separated by years, separated by geography, separated by different financial instruments and different political systems, shared one identical signature: insider knowledge, public silence, civilian consequence. This is not coincidence. This is a pattern, and patterns in human systems do not disappear on their own. They require conscious, deliberate, painful interruption. That interruption has never fully arrived. Consider what exists in the world right now. Global debt levels have reached numbers that make 2008 look modest. The Institute of International Finance reported that total global debt crossed $307 trillion in recent years. Commercial real estate markets in major cities are showing stress fractures that analysts are quietly documenting in internal reports that the public has not been invited to read. Artificial intelligence is now being used to create financial products of such complexity that the regulators assigned to oversee them openly admit they do not fully understand them. That sentence should stop every person reading it, completely still. The regulators do not understand what they are regulating. And the ratings agencies, the same institutions that called catastrophic products safe in 2007, are still operating under essentially the same conflict of interest structure, still being paid by the entities they are supposed to independently evaluate. Nothing fundamental changed. The names changed. The products changed. The press releases changed. The structure did not. There are people right now sitting in offices, staring at screens, running models, watching numbers behave in ways that concern them deeply. Some of them have written internal memos. Some of them have raised concerns in closed meetings. Some of them have been quietly reassigned. Their names are unknown. Their warnings are sealed inside institutions that have every financial incentive to keep them that way. This is not speculation. This is the observable, documented, repeated behavior of complex financial systems protecting themselves. So what does an ordinary person do? With this knowledge, the answer is not panic. Panic serves the system. Panic makes ordinary people sell low, and powerful institutions buy cheap. The answer is awareness, understanding that the information reaching the public has already passed through multiple filters, each one controlled by an entity, with its own survival as its first priority. Understanding that silence from institutions is not the same as safety. Understanding that the most important financial question is never the one being loudly discussed, but always the one nobody seems to want to answer. They knew the crash was coming in 1929. They knew in 2001. They knew in 2008. And in each case, the people who paid the price were the ones who were never told. The pattern does not end. It simply waits, and somewhere tonight, in a closed room, a man is staring at a screen, reading numbers that frighten him, and deciding whether to say something. This has been Dominance Aura. If this story made you think differently, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because the most powerful thing an ordinary person can do in a world built on institutional silence is refuse to stay quiet.